The other problem is the science is the results for the most part. It's not necessarily the future outcome, or like we use the previous results in order to kind of project what we think may happen in the future, but we don't actually really know.
So it depends on what kind of paper you're looking at. There's a different, looking back in time is called hindcasting. Looking forward in time is called forecasting. I think in that original post that had us meet, you mentioned that we didn't have enough data to look back. And then I said using ice cores, benthic foraminifera, tree rings, we do. So we use the trends of the past with what we know about the present, and we create these models that can look forward to the future. These work very well, and you can visit carbonbrief.org to see a more detailed look into the evolution of these models, if you will. At first, in the 70s, they were kind of rough. They didn't really work. But now we have constrained so many parameters of the Earth that it's very accurate.
Okay, so it's getting better and better, basically.
Yeah, I'd say it's right. It's perfect now. Okay, not perfect, but it's very good. It's within statistical significances of 95th percentile, 95th percentile.
Based on that data, you've got all the news reports or magazines or articles basically saying, yeah, by the year 2000, New York's going to be underwater.
Though, yeah, so you've heard those claims from Al Gore that, oh, by 2020, no polar ice caps. I want to make it clear that politicians do not speak on behalf of scientists. There have my advisors in the past have advised politicians not to say certain things because it's patently false. No scientist has ever said that there's going to be ice caps melting by 2020. They have said if global warming were to increase at this rate, then by 2020 ice caps could not be there, but they never definitively said, nope, no ice 2020. So
well, I think that's the major problem, because the scientists aren't crafting the laws or the response to the climate change. So if it's really happening and Al Gore's completely misrepresenting it, he's totally undermining all the research process. So my question for you, if you don't like the idea of carbon taxes, which I absolutely don't either, what do we do? Let's say all science is true and we've got, 12 years, not necessarily before we all die, but before it becomes irreversible. What's the course of action? Because ultimately it has to be global, right? It has to be a global decision.
Overall, yes. But in order to reach that, every country needs to reach a point in which their economies have been enough, their infrastructure has been overhauled enough that they can all compete, making this global action work. So if say, for example, this is hypothetical, China, US, Russia, the three biggest polluters, and India, they all went carbon neutral, right? That would ostracize smaller countries like in Africa being productive because, hey, now their infrastructure has changed so drastically, we can't compete. So I think it needs to start, it's an opinion alert, I think start at the national level and then we get to global. I know globalism is like at this point, but in order to make any lasting climate change efforts or mitigation, we need to embrace this. To get to the nitty gritty, to answer your question, you asked, what do we do? The first thing is nuclear. It's green by definition. It's green.
I would not expect a liberal to say that.
Well, you don't expect the liberals that get the most mainstream attention don't say that.
Why is it dangerous to say that? I like nuclear. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, you like, but they act very partisan. Nuclear is very established, very successful. Only 2 times in history has it ever been a catastrophe. Number 1 was Chernobyl. That wasn't even nuclear's fault. That's the USSR's poor management of it. Yep. And the other one was Fukushima, the flooding from the tsunami in Japan. Sure, with rising sea levels, that poses a problem, but hey, we're the US. Let's move inland with the power plants more. Like, come on, boom, problem solved.
We had an issue with 3 Mile Island, right?
Yeah, we had an issue, but it wasn't catastrophic. It was just that one.
Yeah, because it just happened to be isolated.
it happened to be isolated, and the fast reaction of the people working there shut it down. I mean, it's much better. I would rather have 3 Mile Island than climate change. Simple as
I agree.
as simple as that. Um, but yeah, we definitely need to start with nuclear. That would help us meet the Paris Climate Agreement's NDCs a lot faster with a lot less damage to the economy. The next thing is we need to start investing in green technology for sure. You can't go straight nuclear. That's just that there would be too much radioactive waste, and the jobs required of nuclear engineers are highly specialized. You're ostracized portion of the country with blue collar workers, at least in some facet. Green energy, like solar, wind, hydrothermal, geothermal, they all have blue collar job opportunities. And then in order to make that happen, we need to stop giving so many subsidies to these oil companies. So we just gradually ease off the gas on that, start subsidizing solar, wind. I'm going to get a little political here. Donald Trump's tariffs kind of made U.S. solar very non-competitive with Chinese solar. It's a shame. Definitely, China is producing so much more solar energy than the U.S. now. We need to get on that. According to the IPCC, although multiple communities around the world are demonstrating the possibility of implementation of these green energy solutions, very few countries, regions, cities, communities, or businesses can currently make such a claim. So we have states like California, for my home state, making all these trends towards green energy, but the rest of the country is not. I know you as a conservative don't like big government, but federal actions need to be taken to sort of standardize these efforts into green energy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I fundamentally want government to be as small as it needs to be. Yeah. Now, I could also make the case that if it is a national crisis, then it would be the federal government's responsibility to protect the people from potentially from, killing themselves in a way.
Yeah.
Not necessarily through like on purpose, but through no fault of their own, the lifestyle in which we live, if it's having detrimental effects on a global scale, then we should do something to address it. My main concern is that we do what you were describing, which is, ostracizing these blue collar workers, hurting the economy and doing everything we heard, like, changing the tax tariffs. So now we have the best solar, and China and India are just pumping out the same coal, the same oil, the same, and our negative, because I think we did lower emissions like a small percentage, like maybe
we lowered it from 2015 to 2019, it went down 1.8%.
Right. So a small amount we went negative, and in that same amount of time they went up 100% or something ridiculous.
If you look at it, actually, no doubt they've been going up. But China, within the past 3 years, has actually stabilized their carbon output relatively. If you look on an ordinal scale from, let's say, 100% to negative 100%, we went down 1.8%. China actually stabilized theirs about 30%. Also, currently, according to, let me pull it up, according to the IPCC, per capita, the United States pollutes 14.7 gigatons of CO2 per year. China only pollutes 7.2 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. So if you look at a per capita scale, Chinese citizens are living more sustainable lives than the U.S.
Well, yeah, no shit, because there's a bunch of farmer Chinese people who walk everywhere.
So I think the incidence is on the U.S. as one of the biggest polluters.
Well, don't you think it's only just a matter of time as their economy becomes more modernized? And because our rural people have trucks, they have cars. Yeah. Their rural people do not. So it's only a matter of time, and they've got 1 billion more people than us. It's just unfeasible in my mind that they're somehow going to modernize their economy and still beat us.
Yeah, great question. So would you agree that over the past 5 years, let's say, China has gotten more modern?
I think they've tried to, yeah. They've been building cities that don't really have any people in them yet.
Yeah. Remember, I just cited that they've actually reduced their carbon emissions by almost 30%, even as they're becoming more modern. So I would say that they're definitely heading in that direction, that as they're becoming more modern, they're becoming more sustainable.
Through what? Just through solar panels or whatever else?
No, not just through solar panels. I mean, granted, they've restricted their freedoms of their citizens exorbitantly. I have a friend who is doing a study abroad in China. In his prefecture, they actually have different colored license plates where only certain colors are, say you have a blue license plate, you can only drive Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'm not saying we do that in America. I'm just saying as China modernizes, they've become more sustainable. They've done what it takes. We don't need to do that. We're one of the most powerful countries in the world. We have the most modern economy. We have some of the best infrastructure. That's why I think America, all the incidence is on us. We could make some serious lasting change while keeping our own freedoms and avoiding attacks. We just need to start heading that direction and federal level.
Gotcha. Well, and there has to be some hierarchy of who decides what we're going to do from a national perspective. So
Yes, sir.
All I want is to have that ability to make that choice ourselves, rather than a globalist convention of, well, we're going to have the NWO, the New World Order, basically decide, well, we're going to do a worldwide carbon tax. Because, like I said, we've had a lot of different ideas of how we can do this, how we can modernize, how we can lower the emissions. But none of that is really what politicians have put forward.
No, I definitely get your skepticism on how multilateral globalism can be seen as a new world order. But I can cite evidence that will make you feel better. You remember the ozone hole of the 80s, 70s, and that was solved through the Montreal Protocol, which was an international treaty. Enforcement of it, it was a treaty to ban chlorofluorocarbons. Like, hey, we can't do that. That's the only source of refrigerant we have. But they were forced to improvise. They innovated. They found that solution. Catalytic converter with the Clean Air Act. These are like, what the hell? This is impossible. We can't meet these efficiency standards. We can't meet this catalytic standard. Or, granted, that one was only just in the U.S. at the time, but it forced them to improvise. It was the incidence of the act, the regulation, whatever you want to call it, that forced them to improvise. But at the same time, subsidies were given to those car companies. They got some tax write-offs too. So what needs to happen is we need to start, I don't say immediately, cutting cold turkey is terrible. It's a stupid idea. If anyone says, let's just transition to green right now, they're an idiot. We need to go gradually, but at the same time, give subsidies to the green energy. They will innovate. I want to make it clear also that many scientists don't want 100% green energy in America. It's just not feasible. We have way too large of a landmass. Countries like Spain, Nigeria, Germany, Sweden, who are heading that direction, can only make it work just because of their landmass and population. We have too much here. I would say, opinion alert, 80-20, 80% green, which includes nuclear, and have some coal power plants on the East Coast, just because, you know, the Ohio River Valley is so dependent on it, and we have the reserves. That's enough. So combined with legislation that's at a federal level in the U.S. with these subsidies will make us competitive in multilateral international agreements like the Paris Climate Agreement.
Well, that's what I would like to see. I would like to see incentivizing behavior rather than de-incentivizing.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. I will cite, this is coming from the IPCC SR 1.5 report. Global and regional land use and ecosystem transitions and associated changes in behavior that would be required to limit 1.5 degrees warming can enhance future adaptation and land-based agricultural, forestry, and energy potential. Such transitions could, however, carry consequences for livelihoods that depend on said blue-collar jobs. So even the IPCC acknowledges that these transitions have to be just that, transitions. They can't be, this law bans this. No, we need to incentivize better. And currently that administration is doing the current administration is doing the opposite. So
Well, they had Rex Tillerson and stuff in there who was the CEO of ExxonMobil, and it's like, well, I'm not really surprised. Like, to me, when I see
exactly.
the Trump cabinet, and it doesn't look much different from the Obama cabinet. The only difference is one of them is old oil money, and the other one is newer Wall Street money. Because
yeah,
that's who Obama had in there.
It's a terrible compromise. Yeah, it's like which is the shiniest of two turds, right? But the Obama administration did pass such legislation as the Clean Power Plan that made this transition easier, which was overturned in the current administration. I don't want to blame any one person. That's why I say administration. This isn't Trump's fault. It's his body as a whole. I hate when blame is put on the incidents of one person. No, it's multiple people. So
whether it's success or criticism, no one person is ever acting alone in anything.
Yeah, so we need a government. If a conservative administration comes out and says, "Hey, I want to start transitioning towards this green energy," I would be very happy. I'm not averse to voting conservative if they address this problem. I consider myself a one-issue voter on climate change. And if a conservative comes up with a better idea with liberal, I would vote conservative for that. So, yeah, we need to stop being so partisan. We need to stop being so rooted in our ways, and we need to start transitioning. I mean, it's America. We innovated more. We're more magnanimous than any other country on the planet. We have the best innovation, the best scientists. We have the best science. We can do it. Yeah, we're the best.
That's right. We absolutely are, and we can.
We can. It's quite literally the American way to solve problems. And this is the greatest problem in human history. We can solve it. If anyone's going to solve it, it's America. So let's do it.
I think liberals and conservatives would be a lot more on the same page, but there needs to be a certain set of checks first. Like, I would want to see an independent audit of the federal government. I want them to come in from the public sector, from the private sector, and come into the public sector and say, here's where we can cut waste, bureaucratic waste. Because whenever you have something like the Environmental Protection Agency and you say, oh, I'm going to cut money from that, people go, whoa, 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 what are you doing? You can't cut money from the EPA. Well, they bought chairs for $6,000 each. Okay, something went horribly wrong there somehow. And I know how public governments work, and it's very similar to how federal governments work, and that is we got a set budget this year. If we don't spend it, next year the budget shrinks. So we got to spend it. We got to spend it on whatever we can. That money's got to disappear. And then next year we need a little more. We need a little more than we got last year. So it ends up having this gradual growth, and nobody's checking on it. Nobody's auditing it. And then they want to come out and say, yeah, we have this real issue going on with the planet, but we need more. We're going to need more growth. Yeah. And we don't want to be checked.
Absolutely. That's undeniable. And I feel that a multilateral international treaty would help solve that, where countries are held accountable to each other. So there wouldn't be that waste. That's where I would say that would solve the problem of that. I 100% agree with you, Jeremy. I was disappointed when I heard that.
Yeah, I understand that concept too, because it sounds awesome. My question just comes down to who's going to be doing it.
Yeah.
From a national level, is it going to be the banksters, or I don't know anybody who'd be able to do that.
Again, the global sort of treaty. Remember, it's a treaty. It's not gonna. No, there's no military action. It's an agreement. It's a formal agreement by multiple countries. I think the IPCC should take the reins on that. We should have representatives from every country. I think that we should sort it by GDP power per capita. So countries with higher GDP, Russia, China, US, should have more representatives, just like our house here. We could definitely model it on the American government. What constitution has worked better than ours? None. Let's split just like that. And boom, you have a global, I wouldn't say global government again.
Yeah, that's a buzzword. Got to be careful.
Yeah, you can't say that. It's not a global government. It's a global treaty on this one topic. I think people are afraid because they think it's going to leak into other things. They think it's going to be like, oh, your military now is globalized. No, it's just regarding climate change. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, the main overarching fear is having some unelected to a certain degree, not elected by the American people, or maybe, you know, through a republic system like what you're talking about, of elected officials who vote on our behalf, who are then saying your way of life is going to change because we're smarter than you and we've decided.
Yeah, no,
So
it would be.
That's the elitist type of fear.
Yeah,
That people have.
I fear that too. No, I think that's smart. That I applaud conservatives in that they are strongly rooted in that our way of life to be determined by us. And I think when you have representatives representing the U.S. in this global climate change treaty, they have our country's best interest in mind as well. There's going to be concessions, though. Obviously, our way of life does have to change in order to address this climate change problem. It's not going to be free. I think we don't have to do what China did with that one license plate example. We shouldn't do that. That's just morally wrong. But we need to give concessions. We need to stop having the capitalism now where we have this problem of surplus. We're going to need to give up some of our comforts in the sense that we should focus on using what we only need, not what we can buy.
I understand surplus. I think we have excess.
Exactly. Surplus
excess,
is good.
Yeah, surplus is fine
surplus
because when stuff goes south, you're going to want a little left over. You're going to want something in the stores, but excess results in piles of garbage, and I think it's like 20 or 30% of the food we buy is thrown in the trash.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not only is that a waste of money, but that's a problem.
I like having my Dave's Killer Bread line up for me at the store with all the different brands. When like you said, 30% of it is being thrown away, that's the problem.
Yeah, because it just sits in a landfill.
Yeah,
and it sends off all the CO2 and adds.
Surplus is good. Yeah, surplus is always good. I mean, we need it, but an excess surplus that the modern Western world has now, that's the problem. So we're on the same page here.
Cool. There's another thing too. Is there really a green form of energy? Because what you said earlier about nuclears, obviously nuclear waste, with the wind turbines, those can't be recycled. The solar panels, I don't know if those can be recycled or not, but I would assume there's a process to breaking them down.
Great question.
A long time ago, when we were using whale blubber for oil lamps and stuff, petroleum and oil was seen as a green form of energy because now we don't have to kill whales anymore. And over time, it starts to change. And just like the batteries in Teslas and whatever else have tons of heavy metals in them, they're not green, really. It just doesn't happen to have the CO2 that regular engines have. And so is this going to be a constant moving target that we just have to keep re-aiming and shooting at as we progress?
I'm very glad you asked this question. It's a great question. So if you, in the sense of the word green, I mean carbon neutral.
Okay.
But if you're talking about in the sense of the word of pollutants as a whole, there's no such thing as green energy. Humans can't be green by nature unless we want to go back to the dark ages, which nobody wants, you know?
Right. And you know what? When I was younger, I was way in favor of that. I'm like, yeah, let's go back to the 1800s, live on the land and, you know, hunt what we need and have small communities and all that type of stuff. Nobody wants to do that.
Nobody. Yeah, no, I enjoy
everybody. I enjoy having my food show up where I know it's going to be, and you know the money hits my auto bill, and you know everything's just taken care of. And I don't think anybody's ever going to, once we've had this taste of this life, that we're, even if anything goes rocky, we're going to jump back into the way that we have. And so that's why for the solution, it's important that everybody can still live and be a part of the world that we've created without necessarily saying, all right, well, look, no more cows. You guys need to start riding railroads again. And no more airplanes in this Green New Deal business. And people, of course, are like, what? And to me, I see that as the Overton window, as, well, we want something right here, but let's say we want this, so that by the time we work it back, we get exactly what we wanted in the first place.
Yeah, that's not conducive to anyone. Me and my friends have a running joke in that, oh, what if we were the anarcho versions of our ideologies? I'd be the anarcho primitivist. Oh, time to go back to living in caves, taming wolves. No, no, no. To answer your question about the green, in the sense of carbon, net carbon zero, there is green. In the sense of pollutants, there isn't. But there's this amazing paper published by B. Catman, cited 304 times. Let me see the journal. It was published in the U.S. Department of Energy's journal, Office of Scientific and Technical Information. You said that, like you said, wind turbines can't be recycled. Solar panels can be recycled, but the process of creating the photovoltaic cells has lots of lithium, heavy metals. If you look at the net carbon emissions and net pollutants amount, such as aerosols and the leachates that go into our aquifers, on a 30-year period, which is well within the lifetime of a photovoltaic cell, there is a net decrease in the amount of pollutants and carbon released. So yes, it takes pollutants to manufacture, but according to this paper and multiple study, if you want to know more, they have a really extensive bibliography in that paper I just mentioned. The net is much better. We will never get to the point of having no pollutants unless you want to go anarcho-primitivist, which is stupid. Wind turbines, while definitely good, I think should be highly localized because of the fact they can't be recycled. So places like Palm Springs, I'm not sure if you've been there here in California. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Palm Springs, in my lifetime, I'm only 23. In my lifetime, there's been an exponential increase in the amount of wind turbines there. It takes up a large land footprint, yes, but the area outside Palm Springs is wildly uninhabited. And it's beautiful. It powers all of Palm Springs. These have been up there for over 20 years. You can't argue that there's a net decrease in even unrecyclable wind turbine. There's been a net decrease. Nuclear, that's, I think, what people are afraid of. They hear the word nuclear waste and they think, oh my God, fallout, everything. We actually bury these in mountains. My grandfather, he works for Sandia National Labs. He was a nuclear engineer. It's perfectly safe where we put these in the mountains. We have so much mountain space where I think the tighter regulations on is how we transport, not in fact in how we dispose of it, but how we transport that nuclear waste needs to be regulated a lot more. So there's definitely these concessions with the rise of electric cars. We're seeing a solid waste issue within the next 20 years of the batteries, unless we develop technology to recycle it. But I would much rather have a solid waste issue than an air pollution and climate change issue. We readily deal with tons of batteries than something as abstract as, hey, look, our climate's warming. How do we deal with that indirectly?
Right. It seems a little bit easier from just the fact that it's localized. It's like, well, there's the issue versus, well, the issue is kind of the air we breathe and all that.
Exactly. And my little brother, he's a car nut. He loves cars. If you want your electric cars to look badass, we have that technology too. We can put little horns on them that make them sound like muscle cars. Do what we want. So that's the only objection I've heard to electric cars is they're beta male. That's the only one. I'd drive a Prius in a heartbeat. I don't care if they would.
I don't know, man. The new Teslas are not very beta. I mean, those are pretty badass. Oh, yeah. And going 0 to 60 in 2 or 3 seconds with no gear shift. I mean, that's pretty next level.
Yeah, there's nothing
silently.
Yeah. I got my girlfriend by being carbon neutral. There's nothing harder than being carbon. So
yeah, so, I'm probably not going to drive a Prius, but I honestly don't care really whether I drive a gas car or an electric car. It comes down to me to basic mathematics, like costs.
What's more cost efficient?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, of course, it's kind of like the trends in sustainability with, like fashion retailers and stuff like that. Yeah, a lot of people want that. But what the data is showing is that they're not necessarily always making the purchase because it's sustainable. Because sustainable is more expensive.
I would say
fast fashion's a problem. And
I would say the majority of people don't buy an electric car or a hybrid to be sustainable. They're just trying to avoid paying gas. If you want cost efficiency, then electric cars are not as cost efficient as gas cars. For sure, you can't say they are. But hybrid cars are way more cost efficient than straight up gas cars. So I think that electric cars are great. Hydrogen cars are very experimental. I can't make any definitive claims on what's going to happen with that because obviously it's still in development. Hybrid is the way to go.
Well, and that to me is kind of what we've been hitting on here is a hybrid car is essentially the connection between what liberals and conservatives want. It's the gap bridger between you have a gas car and now you can't have that anymore. Here's an electric one. It works more efficiently because the newer technology with batteries and charging and electricity aren't really at a point where they can beat a gas engine. But together, they can have benefits.
You just said something very interesting in that, like, we have the hybrid cars that are the bridge, and then you said, "Oh, you can't have a gas car anymore," and you can't. That's what I'm emphasizing here. You said you can. I hear that a lot, and I want to make it clear that my side, what my side's trying to do, what I want to do, and what the science wants to do is not ban anything. We don't want to say you can't have it. I mean, this is America, goddammit. I can have whatever I want. But
yeah.
What needs to happen is not banning things, but incentivizing. We need to shift the infrastructure, not say you can't have anything.
Yeah.
It's just a dire pollutant as a whole. For example, before we had the fluorescent light bulbs, the light bulbs before that were just wildly inefficient. That's when I think we should ban something, is when it's just so inefficient, when there's much better option. And in this case of cars, gas versus hybrid, we don't ban gas cars. We just need to incentivize. So
yeah, and I understand what you're saying because you're more of a level-headed person, right? You know the science, you understand the consequences of it, and whether you're a liberal or not, you're an American, and you have the same kind of principles of live and let live. You know, I'm an American, goddamn it, let me own it. Unfortunately, that peaceful majority isn't who's crafting the law. And what I would want to see more of, and I know it's not very common to see your side picking on your side, but I don't hear a lot of people who are rational and level-headed and saying, no, it's not that you can't have this anymore, because I hear people saying I can't have the gun to defend myself, the AR, and that specific type and style. So it's not out of the realm of possibility for a politician to say, no, you can't have that car anymore.
Yeah, you'll find that I pick on anyone if they. I am firmly rooted in what's fact, and I don't act partisan in any way. And yeah, I would agree that today's politics is very much radicalism. People want to hear radicalism. Not many people are paying attention to Mayor Pete. He, in the recent debate, when addressing climate change, he said something that was literally from a paper. He almost plagiarized it, to be honest. I could tell he's read the paper. He said something very level-headed, very profound, that a bunch of scientists from UCSD, Ralph Keeling, Corey Gabriel, they published this literally this year, and I can tell he's read it. But who's getting the attention? You have Bernie, who's saying, like, oh, we're free college, free healthcare, that. He's living, well, that's amazing. It's what Jesus would have wanted. We're not living like Jesus. We have to be realistic here. And then you have people like Elizabeth Warren, who says all these buzzwords. We can do it. Technology will innovate. I want action now. I don't want to wait. So she's not saying exactly how she's going to implement her plans. And then Michael Bloomberg is, he's just out of touch with what real Americans want.
100%.
In the sense of the climate change debate, Mayor Pete is my go-to, who on the left I think represents us very well and represents what you and I are having a discussion about today. With a disclaimer, just the climate change. That's all I'm referencing.
Right. Yeah, I know that's your main focus for sure.
Yeah.
So let's say that we don't do what we need to do. We don't address these problems, and it's 12 years later. We're not going to reverse it anymore. The fallout of that is global temperature rising, mass displacement, or is that still part of what's been misinterpreted and kind of used from a political perspective?
Your question was, what happens hypothetically if we go on the path we're going on, and it's been 12 years. It's 2035, 2032, 2035, which was the deadline of basically what the IPCC claims. What happens? Well, I think it's important to understand why 12 years. What's so special about 12 years? 12 years represents, or around 2035, represents what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suggests as the carbon tipping point. It represents the point in which the planet would have warmed 1.5 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial conditions. And that's significant because that represents one of the fastest rises in global temperature in the Earth's 4.3 billion year history. It has dire consequences for multiple ecosystems. We're seeing the loss of one now, coral reefs. We see some mangroves off Sri Lanka, India, the Everglades, wetlands in Florida are dying off. 1.5 degrees represents the threshold in which multiple sensitive ocean-going species are going to die. Phytoplankton, calcium silicate foraminifera, anything that with a shell, basically.
Okay.
We've seen Dungeness lobsters actually off Alaska having the thinnest exoskeletons in the history of the planet. They're literally being dissolved alive in the oceans. So this 1.5 degrees was a scientific threshold established by the IPCC. To answer your question, what happens? I encourage your viewers to go to the IPCC's website, go to the AR 1.5 report, and you will find in there something called RCPs, Representative Concentration Pathways. It's 4 lines. Number 1, RCP 2.5, RCP 4.5, RCP 6.5, and RCP 8.5. 2.5 is a line that shows us leveling out by 2050 with respect to temperature. That's if yesterday we were to go green, cold turkey, 100% green energy. That's not feasible. It's just there as a reference. Then is RCP 4.5. That means if tomorrow we go green, 100% cold turkey. Technically it's possible, but I don't think that's a good idea because of what we talked about earlier. It would collapse the economy. People would suffer. We're ostracizing a large proportion of blue-collar workers. RCP 6.5, that represents if what you and I talked about, we implement what we have talked about with respect to conservative and liberal agreement. Our government gets together, incentivizes, moves gradually. We ratify the Paris Climate Agreement. Boom. We alter the Green New Deal to not be so progressive. I think it's a little too progressive. We're not ready for it yet. It needs to be altered, definitely. But what happens there is our global temperature will flatline in 2075. So we will unfortunately warm 1.5 degrees, but not warm 2 degrees. 2 degrees Celsius warming would be devastating. That's a bad idea. I'll explain that in a second. RCP 8.5 represents business as usual. It represents where we're headed now. That we're seeing, if you look at that line on the report I mentioned, it's exponential. It doesn't, on the scale of the graph, it doesn't cool. It heats up 4.5 degrees by the end of 2150. That's death. Like, that's uninhabitable for most life on the planet today.
Say that last part again.
4.5 degrees warming. If the planet were to warm 4.5 degrees, life on as we know it now would be uninhabitable. Species would be dying off. It would be the 6th large mass extinction. No mammal now can survive that. Reptiles can't survive that. Insects would be the only thing. We would see the age of the insects.
Yikes, that sounds terrifying.
Is that happening? No, I only said that as a reference as RCP 8.5. Where we're headed, are we going to get there? No, I think we'll avoid it. But if we do what your question asks and we just ignore that but not reach that elliptic threshold, we're seeing the death of a lot of really relevant ecosystems in the next 25 to 50 years. By 50 years, 2050, 2060, coral reefs are going to be dead. all of them. And coral reefs.
And the temperature increase creates the acidification in the ocean?
No. The temperature increase, while the temperature rise of the ocean is one of the factors of the death of coral, the main reason is the increase in the decrease of the pH, the acidity. The acidity is increasing of the ocean because CO2, when emitted into the atmosphere, half of it goes into the oceans.
Mm-hmm.
When it goes into the oceans, it creates carbonic acid, lowering the pH, raising the acidity. That's killing the microcosms of coral.
Gotcha.
You can quote scientists on saying within our lifetime, you and me, Jeremy, we're going to see the death of coral. Coral represents a major keystone ecosystem in the ocean. It harbors most of the biodiversity of the ocean. It filters the ocean water off places like Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, the Gulf of Mexico. It acts as a storm break, so flooding worse. So imagine if there was no coral in the Gulf. Imagine Katrina times 4. You see these flood inundation zones as well. So it's a really, really important.
And so that's kind of an answer to the conventional thinking of like, oh, well, plants eat CO2. So if we have more CO2 in the atmosphere, plants are going to be eating more. It'll be good. We'll have more fauna. And I don't see a problem with it. But the reality of it is what we don't see is it's absorbing into the oceans, acidifying and killing all of the life.
Even the increased CO2 in the atmosphere isn't increasing the amount of plants. It's only greening it. It's a term in the scientific community called CO2 fertilization. We've seen the MODIS satellite by NASA. What was it? MODIS. I can't remember the name of the others. There's one other satellite. I'm sorry, I can't remember, but sure uses something called Normalized Vegetation Difference and Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. And it shows that plants have become more green because of the CO2 rise, but they are literally suffocating on CO2.
So it's just too much.
The greening results in that their chlorophyll concentrations are increasing, trying to increase their photosynthetic metabolic rates to take up more CO2, but the rise in CO2 is going too fast. They're literally suffocating. It's like if you're a pretty buff guy, it's like if you were to intake a bunch of grilled chicken breast, like, yeah, chicken breast is good for you. It gets you shredded. But if you're just constantly eating it, you're going to get fat,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. If I can keep it down even.
Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately, as you know, plants can't throw up. So
yeah, they pretty much just got to keep taking it.
They're literally suffocating on their food. So
okay. So last question, last point that I've seen is about volcanoes.
Yeah.
So when a volcano goes off, the amount of CO2 is obscene. Like if Yellowstone were to go off, because that one's like
that's the only enormous volcano alive. Yep.
Yeah. So if that one were to go off, it would essentially create the dinosaur die-off type of thing because it would black out the sun. The CO2 would be insane. But even on a smaller scale, like not world-ending, if just we're on this trajectory, like let's say we start fighting back and we start lowering our stuff back and then a volcano goes off.
Yeah.
Are we totally screwed?
So volcanoes are a complex geological phenomena in that they act over large time scales. The rise and fall in CO2 of the past has been a balance between chemical weathering of CO2 that's taken it out of the atmosphere through mountain building, like of the Himalayas during the Ordovician, versus supervolcanism, which has seen rises in CO2 throughout the time period during Permian. That's what caused life to explode. Was supervolcanism created our greenhouse effect. So yes, volcanoes emit an obscene amount of CO2, but the importance of it, there's multiple points I'm going to get to here, but I want to address the CO2 first. It's obscene, but it's only at a point scale. It's not global in that of human emissions. So yeah, while it's a lot, it's going to be dispersed pretty quickly, and it's not going to linger very long.
Gotcha.
Number two, multiple papers by the American Geological Union have shown that the net effect of a volcanic eruption is actually a cooling. And this is interesting because, like, hey, they emit CO2, right? What else do they emit? Do you know anything else they emit?
No.
Ash.
Oh, to block out the sun?
What happens with that is you have an increase in aerosol amount. So that's going to start blocking out incoming solar irradiance, and it creates a net cooling effect. That's what killed the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs love CO2. That's the only reason why reptiles got so big, right? Reptiles, they only got so big because the planet was so warm back then. But what killed them was a mix between supervolcanism and the comet during the end of the Jurassic, right? The comet displaced so much dust in the atmosphere, it cooled the planet down. Remember? What happened after that? You saw the rise of the mammals. What other genus of animal has fur, a natural winter blanket? No, nothing. Mammals. That's why mammals became the dominant life form on the planet, because the planet cooled because of all these aerosols. So if Yellowstone were to erupt, other than the sheer amount of collateral damage in the U.S. and that part of the world, we would see a net cooling effect according to the literature.
So it's kind of counterintuitive in a way. You'd think it'd be making it hotter, be making it worse, but it's different from globalized use of like carbon vehicles because it's a one-time event, it disperses itself, and then it's basically over, versus every single day adding more and more and more.
Yeah, so it goes back to the whole, what are the drivers of climate change? Could you name a few of the drivers?
I would assume it's all the vehicles, the fashion industry, like factories, manufacturing.
Global, like CO2 is one of the drivers, right?
Oh, yeah.
CO2, there's two other main ones in layman terms. There's hundreds, but in layman terms overall, CO2 or greenhouse gases like methane and water vapor. The other one is solar irradiance, the sun, and the third one is aerosols. This goes back to, how do we know CO2 is the problem, right? How do we know? Well, if there's three drivers, what about the medieval warm period? What about the Ordovician ice age? What is all this? So it's a mix between the three drivers. The Ordovician ice age was a random ice age in the period of a greenhouse period. It occurred mainly due to the fact that solar irradiance decreased. The amount of sunlight coming into the planet decreased while CO2 increased. So you're like, hey, the skeptics will cite that as evidence that CO2 isn't a driver because CO2 increased, yet it got colder. No, it's because the incoming solar radiation decreased exponentially through a process called the Milankovitch cycles, or global wobbling, which happened every 16 to 35,000 years. The medieval warm period, that was caused by increased solar radiation. And that's another thing skeptics will use. They'll say, hey, medieval times, there were no industrial processes. How did it get warmer if CO2 remained stable? Boom, solar radiance increased because of a Milankovitch cycle. Today, we've seen more aerosols, which have a net cooling effect, like I just cited, from volcanoes, from anything. They net cool. We've seen an increase in those, so the planet should be getting cooler. We've also seen a decrease in the solar luminosity, solar radiance. This is cited from NASA themselves. We've seen a decrease in the incoming solar radiation. That should be cooling. So why are we warming? The only driver left is CO2. And we can without a doubt say that CO2 has increased because of humans. That's how we know.
Gotcha. So we've controlled the variables to the point where we can pretty much point to this being the main issue.
We have enough empirical data on every variable, say, within a 99% confidence interval, which means without a doubt, because nothing can be 100%. Without a doubt, that CO2 is the driver of today's climate change. Maybe not in the past, but 2 days. And where does CO2 come from? Mainly humans. I also want to address here, this is really important that I this. You'll hear the claim that humans only contribute about 3% of the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. We're only 3% of the Earth's natural carbon emissions. Sorry, correction, that's what the claim is. That's true. But if you look at the natural carbon emissions of the planet, it's in balance with each other. Before the industrial process, if you look at Ralph J. Keeling from UC San Diego, this Keeling from Mauna Loa Observatory has shown CO2 to be relatively constant under the industrial process. So picture it like this. There's two tanks, right? Tank A, tank B. One is pumping water into they're pumping water into each other at the same rate. That represents natural emissions. Emissions would be as if into tank A, you were to turn on to a faucet. Now you have this external amount of CO2 being put into the system. That's going to accumulate. That's
right.
So it's that 3% emissions of humans that is causing the accumulation.
Right. And the other part is 3% sounds like not very much, but we're also talking about an increase of 2 degrees is going to wipe out, large populations of biodiversity. So it may seem small, but on a global scale, 3% change is pretty significant.
Yeah, and it's exacerbated by the fact that if you, the 3% over a long period of time since the Industrial Revolution represents that, but also in that the people will say, oh, CO2 isn't even 1% of our atmosphere's composition. You're right, 99% is oxygen, nitrogen, and argon, but none of those have a greenhouse effect. If you look at their absorption pictures, none of them are contributing. So the only ones contributing are CO2 and methane. So 99% of the atmosphere is not acting as a greenhouse. It's that 1%. So that 3% increase is just exacerbated even more.
And are you saying that 3% year after year is compounding on itself in a way?
Oh yeah. Year after year after year, we've seen the solubility of the oceans decrease. So that 3% has actually increased in recent years because the warmer the ocean becomes, chemically less soluble carbon dioxide becomes. So it's actually more around 4.5% now.
Jeez.
It's a positive. It's called a positive feedback.
Yeah, positive feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I think we're a lot more on the same page than what the media would make it out to be. You'd expect somebody who says I'm a liberal to be crazy and to be all for whatever these political types have to say is the solution. But really not. It's actually a lot more grounded than that. And that's why I wanted to have you on in the first place, because for the first time in social media history, instead of attacking the person, you attacked the argument. And I know and can admit that I don't know, that I am not a climate scientist, that I have not put in the hours and read the appropriate literature and all that and been exposed to it in order to really be able to say, oh, I know for certain that this whole thing's a hoax and, China's behind it or whatever else. And I want to live here and I want my kids, we might not be able to have rhinos. And that's not even necessarily a climate change issue, just because people can't stop killing them for their horns. If my kids don't have rhinos, that's lame. Maybe I'm being trivial, but rhinos are like dinosaurs, dude. I want my kids to be able to see the animals and the life that we have here. And if we're displacing and destroying this thing through sheer ignorance or apathy, then I want to be able to do something about it.
Yeah, at its very base, climate change is destroying the American way of life in our country. It represents, the Department of Defense has cited climate change as one of the leading causes of threatened national security. And I know I can appeal to you conservatives in that you guys are very heavily, one of your hallmarks is you care about border security. I can promise you this, the rise of climate refugees is going to be a refugee crisis like no other. You think seriously that's going to look like a walk in the park once places like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka go underwater. So it's in everyone's best interest to stop this. If you don't want to stop it for the sake of the animals like I do, I care more about the wildlife, the other species on this planet. Stop it for your lifestyles. Stop it because it's threatening what your best interest is, no matter who you are. And I hate that the media on both sides is radicalizing everyone so much. I miss the days of Kennedy, of Nixon, where liberals and conservatives were able to agree on something and not act partisan. And I think you and I, we're back there. We are how things should be. And that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this podcast with you in particular, was you're very receptive of the information. You sought out questions not to discredit me, but you sought them to learn and to assimilate into your own worldviews. And I implore your viewers, your listeners, to be skeptical of what I told you today. Go do the research. Go look at the papers I cited. Go into their bibliographies of the papers. Do their own research. I promise you that using these papers, it's a good foundation to start your research, and you form your own opinions. And you'll see that this truly is one of the greatest threats humanity has ever faced. So,
well, that was well articulated. I appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that you came on here, and I took about an hour and 10 minutes of your time, but I feel like I got a lot of good information from it. I feel like I've got better arguments that I can bring to people from my own side without seeing like, oh, you're one of those leftist political hacks or whatever else. And it's like, no, like both sides want a healthy earth.
yeah,
Both sides want a safe earth. And from a conservative angle, it's conservation, right? And we want smaller government so that we don't damage things. One of the greatest things our government ever did was create national parks. And I want that to be there. I want that to exist. And outside of that, like 50% of people live within only a few miles of the coast. So if all of a sudden the coast shifts a little bit, that's just massive displacement, even within our own nation, let alone everywhere else in the world. So I think if we're going to do something, we better do it pretty quick.
my house is going to be beachfront property here in Orange County.
Right. And that's just crazy to me. And what I want to know at the very least, because it seems like a problem that's so global, it's out of our reach, there's nothing we can do, and so we continue living our lives just normally. Is there anything substantial we can do, or even minuscule as individuals, that would sort of offset this, other than like buying a Prius?
So, not really. The impetus is not on us as individuals. It's mainly on the 100 corporations that account for 90% of the U.S.'s carbon emissions. That's it. But individuals can certainly make a difference and influence these corporations in their own decisions. For example, something that me and my girlfriend have vowed to do is we gave up beef as a whole. We just gave it up. The land use changes from the agriculture of grazing cows to the watermark of feeding them. We if you give up beef as a whole, that's 4,000 gallons of water a year. I'm not asking you to do that. That's just something that we've decided to do as a couple. We are very environmentally minded. But if you want something realistic, that it would be, investing or buying a hybrid car for your next car. Maybe skipping that extra serving of beef at your next lunch. Don't cut it out like me and my girlfriend did. That's just something we did. But be more mindful of what you're choosing. Walk somewhere, and if it's only like 5 minutes away. Just these things. But I want to make a point that it's not your fault as an individual. It's these corporations, these multi-billion dollars. It's the Bloombergs, the Bezoses. He just donated 10 billion. That's a great start, but that doesn't account for the hundreds of gigatons of carbon he's put into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's mainly their fault. You and I as middle class, we can do our part in our everyday lives, but we have to understand that it's mainly the fault of the 1%.
And are those even corporations that we can avoid?
No. You could technically avoid using Amazon, but I'm not saying avoid using them. I would say shop in bulk. Don't stop using Amazon. When you do your Christmas shopping, don't place an order for individual items that come separate. Order them all. Maybe skip on the express delivery. Order normal delivery. Just do things in bulk. Do everything at once. Don't get what you don't need. Heck, maybe just shop locally for your groceries. Don't go to like big chain grocery stores like Stater Bros. Go to your farmer's market. Granted, it's more expensive, but I mean, you asked what we could do as individuals. That's something we could do.
And you know what? That's also a peace of mind type of thing, going to a farmer's market, because you know the guy's name who you bought food from. And that's it's just not something that people do average, like the average person. They get it from the market or whatever else, like from the supermarket, Walmart, whatever. And they don't know where that came from, whether that came from this country or from down the street or what. And I think especially like when you're talking about beef or chicken, with the whole Tyson and the ag gags that they have going on where you can't show any of this undercover footage of people being horrible to the animals and stuff, because it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can cut out beef. I'm trying to gain weight.
Absolutely.
But I understand the principle behind what you're talking about. And I also think that even no matter how minuscule you think it does have a benefit, not only for yourself, but for the world in a qualitative and quantitative, whether it's, super, super tiny or not. It is there. And if we all were to be like, hey, I want to take better care or do these little things, use less water, because that's another thing we didn't talk about. And no matter what is going to be a problem, our fresh water sources are not only running out, but are being used for these factories and stuff, and warming that water and killing off and creating algae blooms and all these other problems that we're going to have to address too, regardless of this whole overarching global warming thing.
Yeah, you can save tons of water just by taking 1 minute less of a shower. I have a timer I have an alarm. I take 5-minute showers. I have an alarm. So just little things. If you do a bunch of little things, it equals one big effort. And again, I want to emphasize, this is America. God damn it, we have a free market. We have a bunch of small businesses. Don't go to McDonald's. Go to that mom and pop burger shop. Support the small business. Support local. Not only is that beneficial for our economy, you're promoting blue collar jobs as well, and you're just being more sustainable. So it's literally, solving climate change isn't a partisan issue. It's something everyone can do, and it's something everyone should do.
I agree. I think the best way we can do that is to basically call out the politicians who are misrepresenting the data, because they are fundamentally undermining the work, the years, and the meticulous study that goes into what is the climate science and everything else, because it's not easy and it has to be reproducible, and all that goes out the window when somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about brings it up and then tries to use it as an emotional or fear-driven policy decision.
Yeah, exactly. AOC saying we're all going to die in 12 years, to me, is just as bad as Trump saying it's a Chinese hoax. They're both patently false and doing a disservice to us, the normal American. So
Right. Well, that's awesome. I think that's a good way to end it. It's a good way to wrap it up. We had about an hour and 20 minutes, I think. So I think we pretty much hit it. What I want everybody to do that's listening is to comment, bring up something we talked about, elaborate on it more, come up with some sort of, whether it's criticism on me. I mean, I wasn't real hard on you, Matt, as far as I know, but I never came into it intending to try and say, oh, well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I specifically brought him on because I know he knows what he's talking about, and he's reasonable enough to talk to a conservative. So that's good enough, like, for me to be able to open the door and talk about this that I know I don't know enough about, and that I want to be a part of the solution, not necessarily the problem. And to me, when you start building up an audience and then you do things that you know to be false, it's not only malicious, but it's just disingenuous. There's no reason for me to sit with an audience and tell them things that I know to be false. And at the end of the day, I want to grow, I want to know more, and I want to be a part of the solution, not necessarily the problem. And if I can influence and show people that, hey, not only can liberals and conservatives talk about something that is politically divisive, from the media at least, and come up with workable solutions and be mostly on the same page, then hey, maybe we're not as bad as we think we are. Maybe we're not as divided as they want to make us think, and maybe we have a pretty good shot at making this work.
We do. Yeah, it's the elites that have us pitted against each other. It's time that liberals and conservatives come back together like we used to 40 years ago. This is the greatest country on the world. If anyone's going to solve this problem of climate change, it's us. So thank you for having me on, Jeremy. This was great. For the viewers, no such thing as a dumb question in the comments. I would love to address anything. If you want a more personal answer, please feel free to email me. I'll bring up any emails if there's another podcast. So I really appreciate it, Jeremy. I'm gonna check out your web store. My dad, he's a huge gun freak, so I saw a shirt on there, so I'll get him one for his birthday.
Appreciate the plug.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. Until next time, and God bless America.
Absolutely. God bless America.